Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session on bridging an unacceptable learning chasm by 2030, sample solutions to rethink system change post-COVID. My name is Susana Ramirez. I'm part of the Catalyst 2030 team, and we would like to welcome you to this session. We're very happy to have you all here. Just one logistical clarification from my side. We'll be recording this session and this will be uploaded in the Catalyst 2030 page in a couple of days. So once again, welcome to the session, and then I will hand over to Neha.
Thanks, Susanna. Welcome everybody to our third set of interactions as the education group of Catalyst 2030. Thank you all for joining in from different parts of the world. Just to give sort of a brief introduction about what is Catalyst 2030, I'm sure many of you already know about it, but for those of us who are joining us new, it's a group of organizations and individuals who sort of come together to work towards more coordinated action to realize the SDGs. And there are multiple working groups as part of the Catalyst 2030, and education being one of them. There's a big focus on working with a systems change perspective, and therefore creating this platform to bring sort of different stakeholders together, practitioners, social entrepreneurs, funders, policy change influencers, all of them to build more spaces for collaboration. And this webinar is also an attempt towards that. This group has been sort of coming together to identify scalable solutions in the space of education, especially in the post-COVID scenario. Scalable, sustainable, relevant, as things are changing around us, and maybe not as well. So to facilitate conversations around what is also changing in the space of education and what is remaining the same. So today we're going to have, just to speak about the format, we're going to have around 9 speakers with us today who are going to be talking about possible solutions and the implications it has on policy change that we want to influence. So each speaker will get 5 minutes. And as they speak, please feel free to sort of put your questions in the chat box. Once all the speakers are done, we will be taking up questions for maybe half an hour after that. And all the conversations and discussions from today will feed into a 2-pager document, which we will then be sharing with funders and policy influencers to direct change which is needed. So with that, I'd like to invite our first speaker, which is going to be Bridge, since the first speaker has not come in yet. So Bridge, with that, I will hand it over to you for 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a heads up when 4 minutes are up so that we stick to our time. Yeah, over to you.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Great to be here. So let me quickly jump in. Basically, if you think about the COVID-19 situation right now, what are the solutions? We know the problem, okay? What are the solutions that are really working, okay? It's face masks, hand hygiene, social distancing. These were not technologies born in 2020. These are technologies from even 100 years ago or even more earlier, when we knew that public health can be managed by very old but very effective ways, but also a combination of these 3 things are very effective. Now hold that thought for a second. I'm going to talk about a little bit about the problem and what is unacceptable. It is unacceptable that over half the children in many low and middle income countries actually cannot read simple texts. Okay, this is also a problem that all of you are actually familiar with. But this is unacceptable, okay? Yeah, the World Bank came out with a new kind of way to look at this. They call it learning poverty. And they say that anybody who cannot read by age 10 is going to remain learning poor in life. Now, just to give you a perspective, in India, how many people are there who are learning poor, who could not read by age 10? Basically, I don't want to go too much into the details, but the number you see on your screen is 250 million completely illiterate in India, and 600 million who are sort of, cannot really read, but they are called literate, and they cannot read, for example, simple text. So the total number is about 850 million people in India who actually cannot functionally read. Now that is totally, totally unacceptable. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? So what can we do about it? Okay, I'll just go clockwise with all the images, and this is my last slide. So the simple solution, and this is something that we kind of researched starting in 1996. So it is a 23 plus 24-year kind of experience that we're bringing to the table here. And all we're saying is that today, 1 billion people are watching television every day for 4 hours a day on average in India. Okay, that's a lot of television. And 70% of that content is entertainment-oriented films, for example, or serials. And what we're saying is that if a Hindi film is shown with Hindi subtitles at the same time, in the same language, basically, and we call it same language subtitling, people will get automatic reading practice. Okay, now, obviously the question is, does it work? Right? It seems perhaps intuitively an okay idea, but does it work? And that's where the evidence bit has come in, and this evidence bit has been collected over 10 years. And if you think about it and if I just go clockwise, you see people in a communal setting watching the television with the subtitles and when the songs come on. Initially, we proposed it on songs, and I'll tell you how it has moved on to dialogue as well. If you look at the third image clockwise, the graph, you'll start seeing that the green zone has more than doubled, and the red zone has half, which means that effectively we can literally, with schooling plus something that they're doing at home complementarily, which is getting reading practice automatically when they watch these songs, when they watch these movies. Over time, that leads to reading skill improvement. It takes about 3 to 5 years for somebody to have that kind of regular exposure as part of their everyday viewing to become good readers. Now, if you see the last image, you start seeing the eye tracking of that. For example, the same person, when that person is watching the film clip without the subtitles, where they're looking, that's a eye tracking heat map. And you compare to the same person, the same clip watching on the right, you start seeing that the gaze has shifted to the bottom. Now, this has been proven not only in India, but in other countries as well. So now the big, I just want to zoom out a little bit from this simple intervention to what policy implications can it have in India and then perhaps other countries. In India, last year, they passed a policy that 50% of all entertainment content on television has to have same language subtitling by 2025. So we have a 5-year window in which this needs to be rolled out. Challenge, of course, is that it is not being implemented yet, not been embraced by the private channels yet, but it is the law. It is actually a requirement now under the Rights for Persons with Disabilities Act. So it is really an act of parliament, and it is required.
Sorry.
So that's 4 minutes?
Actually, you're past 5 minutes. I was
Okay. So I'll just stop. No problem. That's good. That's good. I like that.
All right. Thanks, Bridge. And thank you, I think, for setting the tone with some of the fundamentals of what are the issues in the education space, which is the basic sort of literacy and comprehension related skills, which a lot of sort of children are struggling with, and also sort of the initial context setting that you did around a combination of things which needs to come together. So the schooling plus whatever's happening at home. And I think there are questions for you in the chat box, which you can look at. So we'll take them up later. And with that, I would like to hand over to Colin.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all around the table. My name's Colin McElwee. I'm the co-founder of World Reader, and we came into existence about 10 years ago. So what I wanted to do in the next 5 minutes is to share some of the insights on the digital medium, in a medium that you can deliver reading and impactful reading solutions and experiences. Bridge just laid it out really, really clearly, that this is a big, big problem. The numbers are big. And if I take you to a global level, UNESCO talk about 750 million children that are illiterate. But if you look at lowly literate children and adults, that figure, as weakly literate, as I think Bridge termed it, you're talking about 2.5 billion people on the planet that are, if you like, the market for reading. And if that doesn't imply that tech has a role to play, I don't know what does. So I want to share some of the insights that defend, if you like, that claim, and also explain a little bit around the apathy and the lentitude that a lot of governments and policymakers have been in a situation to actually grasp this. Yes, Susanna, you might just want to, I'm going to share a few slides with you, just really to, as I talk, to just give you an idea of the places that we're working. So we've shared content, local content across the world, in Africa, in India, in the Middle East, and now in South America, on all sorts of digital devices, from Kindles to tablets in a school setting, but also to mobile phone. And when I say mobile phone, I don't just mean the smartphones that we're also fond of and familiar with. I also mean data-enabled feature phone, of which there are many hundreds of millions, if not billions, on this planet. We work in a school situation, and we've got a lot of insights about how teachers take to this, if it's presented to them and they're given training about how to dovetail digital into their classroom experience. But importantly, and this is when we talk about COVID, is that out of school situations for learning are absolutely critical. COVID, as we all know, is not going to go away anytime soon. It's going to recur. And I heard somebody from the WHO talking about a 2, 3, 4 year recurrence at least, and a vaccine 18 months away. The great thing around data, and we've seen about 1 million lines of data that we get back, and anybody using digital gets that. You see what people are reading, you see what people are not reading, and you can craft with local publishers content that will appeal to the reader, both in school settings and out of school. And that's absolutely key, that sort of immediate feedback. And we've also seen a resistance to education in places like northern Kenya and northern Nigeria amongst specific terrorist groups. Well, I can tell you, when education goes digital, you can't stop it. You can burn a school, you can do whatever. But once education goes digital, it can be in the hands of everybody. So yeah, just coming back actually to the last bit. Oh no, just on impact. Let me just mention, we did some research with UNESCO a few years ago. We saw that girls were reading more than boys because we had the data, but not a little bit more, 5 to 6 times more. So as a lever into girls, that was incredibly important. And so let me just spend the last 30 seconds talk about policy implications. I'm going to make it really, really simple, because I've seen an apathy amongst educators when it comes to policymakers, when it talking about large numbers, millions and millions of people. Educators want to talk about quality always, but in business, you talk about a certain level of quality, and you have to talk about scale. And we're seeing the consequences of doing very little in this COVID response, having digital solutions that can get to millions. So I'd say there's 2 policy areas. Ministries of education should begin to think about out of school settings. To date, most ministries I've talked to don't claim that as part of their responsibility. And then secondly, to finish off, every government that puts a education budget together needs to have a digital line in their education budget, either for content, either for connectivity, or for devices. And that's where it's going to become real. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Well within your time. And you covered all the points. I think some important points, just building on what Bridge was sharing earlier about focusing on out of school settings, and they have become even more relevant now in the context of COVID and how that has affected schooling. and continuing education in formal spaces, but also recommendations around the budgets and the need to incorporate digital in that so that we're ready for such situations. I think all of this took us by surprise where we were not prepared for something like this. So again, I think there are a few questions, so you can have a look at that and we'll come back to that. And with that, I'd like to invite David from Bridget. I see you've already introduced yourself in the chat box, so over to you for your 5 minutes.
I'm not able to screen share.
There you go.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so I'm David, CEO of Bridget, and we have a solution called School that really transforms, oops, wrong button. So I'm David, CEO of Bridget, and we have a solution called School that we see the possibility of bridging the unacceptable learning chasm by 2030 with on-page learning. This is a new way of thinking about digital education, and it seeks to shift students from a social media perspective to a social studying perspective. And this is going to require entirely new learning systems. We need to meet the learners where they are, engage them socially, and offer real-time presence and interactivity on web pages. With this paradigm shift, we'll be able to turn the web into a classroom, a study party, a collaboration space, and more. Over the web page, it can be safe. And here you see a web page. Imagine the possibility of an overlay that enables the teacher and students to see themselves together on the web page in live video, the teacher to be able to get indications of the students' engagement, to be able to do quick checks for understanding and checks for feeling to understand where the student is at. In addition, the ability to have on-page interactions with smart tags that enable the students, the learners, to be able to interact with the web page as they're listening or watching their teacher. And also needing to support this notion of being able to stake a claim or a perspective and then provide the evidence to support that perspective. As we know, critical thinking is one of the most important things once we get beyond basic education that will enable young people, learners, to become active participants in creating a world that actually works for all of us and that will enable us to actually survive. That's what the SDGs are telling us, that we need to make big changes and that critical thinking is one of the most important pieces. How does it work? Well, there'll need to be a whole new way to learn. And we're seeing a learning layer over the web that makes thinking visible. How does it work? Well, learners attach smart tags to content snippets. So they could put a note on an Instagram image, create a bridge from a piece of news to a snippet of a YouTube video, put a poll on a podcast. This would supercharge, this on-page learning will supercharge creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, engagement, and even provide a rich data set for assessment, which doesn't exist now in person in the classroom. So what kind of policies would be needed to support the unacceptable learning, support bridging the unacceptable learning chasm by 2030 with on-page learning? Well, there's a lot of things that could be helpful, and on-page learning is going to happen, but is it going to happen at the scale that's needed without policy? No. As I'm sure many people are thinking, how do we get into deep Africa, deep Asia? Obviously, all learners are going to have devices and access to high-speed internet. A second thing would be to compel all mainstream browsers to implement the browser annotation standard. We need to provide all teachers with training to teach critical thinking and other skills needed to be effective adults. We need to provide all students with a safe digital space for learning that is absent of bots, fake accounts, and predators. We need to provide all students with media literacy training to spot and respond to misinformation. And finally, to support the development of a collective learning map or data pool for infectious diseases and SDGs that would be accessible through a community annotation platform, as I have shown with on-page learning. And one way to think about this is there's an internet layer, then you have a collective learning.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, David. I think the interesting thing about such forums is also that we get to cover a spectrum in terms of what are the possible solutions, right from what are the fundamental challenges and issues which we are grappling with to what we can imagine possible solutions to be. And I think your presentation did just that after sort of talking about the reading gaps that are there. But I think what you also did was to introduce teachers into the narrative and what needs to happen with teachers as key players in this ecosystem as well, and the foundation we need to build before we can talk about digital education and the many dimensions of it, with internet being accessible, safety on the digital space as well for students, which I don't think a lot of people are talking about right now. So many layers before we sort of talk about, and also I think talking about critical thinking as a key skill which needs to become part of our core curriculum, and what are the shifts that we need to make there in terms of what are we teaching. So thank you. And again, I think there are questions in the chat box, so please have a look and we will come to that after all the presentations are done. And thank you everybody for putting your questions. Do keep doing that. And with that, I will invite Eleanor to take it forward.
Hi, thank you, Neha, very much. In fact, everybody's presentations so far and your words just then now have led very well into what we're doing at the Commonwealth Education Trust, which is supporting teachers. All of those statistics, those very sobering statistics that we've heard already about the lack of children's ability to be able to have a decent standard of reading and writing by 10, etc. The number of extra teachers we're going to need by 2030, which I think last count was 69 million, etc. All of these are, to me, absolutely mind-blowing. And it doesn't matter, as a teacher of 20 years myself, it doesn't matter how wonderful and pizzazzy you make all the surroundings, unless you make that one resource that is always in the classroom better, you will not see long-term sustained change. And for the Commonwealth Education Trust, that resource is teachers. And we are solely focused on supporting teachers. We have developed a very simple digital platform which contains courses that we deliver that teachers can access either individually or part of whole school use to help them with continuous professional development. They are very much designed for teachers who are working in underserved, challenging communities. Now I have a short video here. Oh, brilliant. Here it comes. I'm just going to talk over the top of this video. It might need to be on silent because it does have a bit of music, which you probably don't want to hear. Thank you so much. If you just press play, that would be great. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through the very simple platform, which you've got here. So you can access it. It works on obviously smartphones as well as laptops. It has simple courses. I say simple, they're not simple at all. They're very pedagogically sound, but they are filled with activities and resources that are specifically designed for teachers who may have 100 children in their class and no resources. We focus on the power of learning partners because ours is a blended learning model. We don't believe in learning digitally in isolation. They also focus on having a teacher portfolio, which we believe is very important in the mission to help teachers become more self-reflective. The courses contain activities and short tasks They will be something where they reflect on their own experience in the classroom or as their own experience as a learner. There are videos which are highly contextualized for the settings that we're working in, with narrators from Commonwealth countries, and posters and resources that they can download of ideas and strategies, questions to ask themselves, etc. after a lesson. That's the video, thank you. So we can dump the video now. That was just a very quick, I can't really speak fast enough to keep up with the video actually, but it shows you, I hope, a little bit of what you will find on the website. But I would urge you to go to our website if you'd like to learn a little bit more about it. I'm aware of keeping to time. So what I think is important, our message is, both Kat and I, who work at Commonwealth Education Trust, are ex-teachers ourselves, and both benefited from sustained and continuous professional development programs. We feel that's one of the things that is really lacking in the countries and the teachers that we support. CPD does happen, but it's expensive. It usually requires teachers traveling to the location. It's not sustained. There's nobody there to support to make sure that the change happens. So as far as policy goes, a commitment and making a long-term commitment to CPD for us is vital. Ensuring that the materials that the teachers are able to access are high quality and transferable for the schools in these settings. I have spent plenty of time in schools in my work with CET and other organisations where teachers are being asked to use some great initiative that supposedly come from the UK or the US or something that simply is not transferable for teachers teaching in the conditions that many of them are, as I said, with large numbers, high absenteeism of children and teachers, etc. So policy making CPD mandatory each week, ensuring that there is a high quality long-term program in place, and then also making sure that, thank you, that the focus is on the blended learning element of digital technology. So working with learning partners, keeping a teaching portfolio. So you're using digital technology for the best of what it can do, which is to deliver high quality materials, as opposed to using it as a answer for everything, which we don't believe it is. We believe it is a facilitator, a conduit, if you like, to providing better support to teachers who have been woefully ignored for many, many years. And I'll finish there.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you for putting the spotlight on the teachers. I'm sure like this pandemic itself has opened up a lot of sort of issues around what kind of preparation do teachers need, and there's an interesting conversation going on in the chat box as well, that what are the kind of sort of skills and abilities we need to equip our children with, and where is the space for socio-emotional learning in that as well. And therefore, what does that mean for the professional development of teachers as well? Are they equipped to engage students in building that as well? And I think a lot of conversations around technology. So what you said in the end is quite apt, that it cannot be the solution for everything, but is a facilitator. And how are we thinking of blended learning models? And I think that sets the stage for Megan to take this up and tell us, how do we make this technology accessible when we are talking about such a great digital divide? So over to you, Megan.
Sure, I'm just going to share my content. Hello, everybody. Megan Falone from the Barefoot College. Could you enable me to share?
Yes, I just did.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry. Okay, so Barefoot has been running a night school program that was designed nearly 30 years ago to be able to take place and be owned by communities in very rural, very resource-stretched settings. And their vision for that, really at the time of founding it, was both to work with parents to give them an understanding in those early years of why education was actually important and of value to their children. And today, of course, that milestone has been shifted, and we're really looking at how do we create a rural education for rural children to stop urban migration, to create dignity and a heroic impression for children to live, work, and contribute in rural communities without necessarily needing to move. Now, you can imagine in the time of COVID that we are in right now, how extraordinary it is that these are some of the only schools in the world I know of that were still running in the midst of the lockdown, because they are completely owned, managed, and run by the community itself. The teachers are part of that community. They're not formally trained in institutions. They go through a very rigorous teacher training program that we've developed over the years. And indeed, there is a civil society element by engaging a village education committee, which then oversees and acts as the bridge to that school. Children come from ages 5 to 15, so it's a mixed age group. And 5 years ago, we started merging technology into that. We started with an R&D department that developed a portable solar-powered projector. These classes are mainly held outside. There's no schoolroom, no school building, but the children come 98% of the time. We have almost no absenteeism. They are able to use the projector exactly in this way as a tool for being able to bring the world to children. 5 hours of solar power charges it for the entire evening. Children go to school between 6:30 and 9 in the evening. And after their chores are done, which immediately means that girls are able to attend. So we have about an 80% ratio of girl students. And so this incredible opportunity for children and even their parents to learn across age groups, across different kinds of curriculum, and for us to really design curriculum that comes from the children, from the teachers, from the community, and touches on our really core principles, which have been, since 2015, the development of citizenship skills, critical thinking skills, deep gender inclusion and gender sensitization, and most importantly, some outreach to parents to bring them into this, this process so that they are actually also imbibing those values and those shifts in social normative behavior that we're trying to accomplish. The result has been things like environmental stewardship curriculums being developed by children using iBooks Creator and then being shared with other children. So now you have two-way content happening. We have a group of very young, wonderful, gifted educators who have endless ideas about different kinds of curriculum and how to put the voices of the children into the curriculum. What we've seen is that when these children transfer into a more formal learning environment, their performance is hugely more engaged and hugely more successful. Their resiliency is very high. Their adaptive skills are very high. Their mental arithmetic skills, things like this that serve rural children extremely well, have really been highlighted and heightened. I think the other remarkable thing is that this model has come about through a partnership with Apple, through a partnership with private sector of Oracle and Apple, and even Google, who's been a partner in some instances. It's been able to really exemplify what can happen when you innovate on education by partnering with actual
30 seconds, Mitchell.
Sure, by partnering actually with the private sector. And I think our next step in this program is really to take this to government, to look at how we can start to get government to really recognize the value of informal but formal education. So I am just trying to go back to stop my screen share. There we go.
Thanks. Thanks, Megan. Very, very interesting. I think you've opened up a new dimension with the focus on the rural education and the rural migration. I think in India, we've seen a lot of that opening up because of this pandemic and sort of the inequalities it has brought up as well. And therefore the role of communities and how are we really building sort of sustainable models of change and meeting people where they are. I think just picking up from what David was saying, meeting learners where they are, but also meeting communities where they are and looking at building relevant models of change as well. So, and again, I think a lot of conversation on the chat box going on, which aligns with some of the earlier conversations that we were having. So do have a look. And with that, I will invite Rana. I think her work also continues to build on the aspect of involving communities. So over to you, Rana.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good morning. I'm Rana Dajani. I'm the founder and director of We Love Reading. We Love Reading it actually really builds on the previous project. What we do is we look at the challenges that we're facing today. First of all, because of COVID-19, there are no schools. And the question of schooling itself is something that we are questioning for the future of education. How does it look like? Will it really have a school or not? And so what we have done is try to identify what is the real challenge in education. And what we have found is about motivating the children to want to learn and then the adults to want to learn so that they can become lifelong learners, because this is how the whole world is connected today, rather than separating it into school and home and work. So how do we do that? To us, that was the problem and the challenge. And during COVID-19, we have additional problems and challenges, which is mental health, because now everybody's at home and coping with what's going on. We have lack of data and connectivity. Not everybody has internet. Not everybody has a digital phone in their homes. Even in the United States, there's lots of places where they don't have internet or the kids don't have technology. So we can imagine the rest of the world as well. So these are real challenges that we are facing going forward. So our vision is creating change makers through reading by changing mindsets, because it's not about finding a solution that somebody can adapt. It's about the people themselves being empowered to identify their own challenges and the root cause, because they know better than anyone else, and then developing solutions for those root causes. And that way, these solutions will be sustainable on the long run because they are owned by the local people, by the people themselves. And therefore, We Love Reading does that by training local volunteers from the local neighborhood. And these are people ages like 16 to 100 years old, men, women. They may have some disabilities of different kinds. It doesn't matter. They don't have to be highly educated. All they have to do is to be able to read a children's book in their local language. And even if they can't read, all they have to do is make up the story as they go. So they read aloud these stories to the children, like ages 0 to 12, who are already running around in the street or under COVID are locked in a little house, in a place. If there's no COVID-19, it could be a school, a community center, under a tree. Doesn't matter. They know best where the kids will come, when they will come, how will they come. So this is part of that ownership, and they assign a time and date and a regular schedule that fits their schedule and fits the girls and the boys of the community. So that way they know the nuances, when the girls are free, where their parents feel safe to send the children. And they themselves are parents reading aloud to their own children. And the stories that they read have particular themes. So it's primarily about fun, but also it's about environment or health or nutrition. So you can actually push out messages of empathy, gender, disabilities, inclusion, and so on through these books, because children learn through stories. We as humans learn through stories. Now, what happens after the children attend the read aloud, they go home with a book. So it's an exchange program. You don't need a lot of books. And they start they're the drivers of reading and learning in their homes. So we've kind of flipped it, motivating the child to want to learn, because they're the ones who are championing the learning. And so even under conditions of COVID-19, we don't know the future of education, there's no schools. This is a community-driven program, which is driven by the children and the women and men who are actually reading aloud. So the impact is on the children, being motivated to learn, wanting to go to school and becoming lifelong learners, and the adults who are reading, who now are empowered to become leaders in their community, creating change, because if they can gather the children and read aloud, what else can they do? So they become social entrepreneurs. And thirdly, the whole community starts to buy in. And the most importantly, our children are reading with a real book, because yes, digital technology is important, but it's not available. So to me, it's a secondary resource. What we do is
30 seconds, Rana.
Yes, we encourage reading aloud for the human-human interaction with the child. And all this is evidence-based, so we do research to make sure what we're doing is correct. So lastly, this has been able to spread. So we're talking about scaling. This has spread to 55 countries because it's very simple, it's flexible and agile, and it's ownership and motivation by the person themselves. So my recommendation as a policy is we need to produce programs that empower the local people, the local community to take a charge of their own future going forward. So looking at community-based grassroots solutions going forward. And We Love Reading is one thing that can be added as a Lego piece to any other program to enrich it, to create the change makers we need and the network around the world that we need. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rana, for your passionate sharing of what is possible when you give the power in the hands of children and you start young with them, making them champions, social entrepreneurs. And I think one thing which you said was very, very important about changing mindsets. So while we can come up with all the solutions that we want to, all kinds of tools, till the time we don't get to that mindset, there's not much change that we can sort of drive home, and really sort of empowering people to find solutions to their own problems and challenges. That's the only way we can build empowering and sustainable solutions in the long run. Again, I think a lot of interlinkages with what has been shared earlier, what Bridge was talking about, and how this can come together with that to promote more reading in the household spaces and in the community spaces, and also the connect with the blended learning models in some ways. Now that we're talking about the future of education being reimagined, I think this is also a good time for all of us to take a step back and really talk about that. What is it that the education needs to sort of be for the future, and what is the place of schools and all of that as well. And with that, I would like to invite Susan for the next presentation.
Great. Hi, everybody. While the slides are loading, Susan Bornstein, the Global Director of Institutional Partnerships and Influence at World Bicycle Relief, WBR. In rural areas of developing countries, a major barrier to education is often physically getting to school, especially for girls. Millions of rural students lack access to reliable roads and affordable transportation to get to school. Students often show up late or miss school entirely due to distance, which impacts learning outcomes. For example, 43% of students living in rural areas of southern Zambia reported being late to school due to distance. Girls in particular face special challenges, including safety and the heavy burden of household chores, which impact the time that they can spend on traveling to school and learning. And this is even more urgent given the context of COVID, and millions of girls risk not returning to schools when they reopen. Evidence from Africa and South Asia suggests that when faced with limited resources, households may prioritize sending boys back to school rather than girls, raising concerns about whether girls will come back to school at all. Next slide, please. World Bicycle Relief created a specially designed bicycle, the Buffalo Bicycle that you saw on slide 1, that meets the needs and preferences of boy and girl students. Of the almost 520,000 bicycles that WBR has distributed to date, over 200,000 have been for rural education in partnership with local communities, NGOs, and government. Our Bicycles and Education Empowerment Program, or BEEP, provides bicycles to students in need. 70% of bicycles go to girl students, and we partner with communities who help identify the needs and locally manage the programs to ensure the long-term sustainability. Our for-profit social enterprise Buffalo Bicycles Limited helps communities sustain the bicycles via access to spare parts and community-based mechanics. Previous evidence suggests that providing bicycles to girl students reduced the gender gap in school enrollment in India, but little was known about the impact of bicycle distribution programs in Africa and whether they can increase girls' empowerment. In rural Zambia, WBR partnered with Innovation and Poverty Action to carry out a randomized control trial, briefly summarized on the slide, to evaluate the impact of WBR's bicycle access on girls' education and empowerment outcomes. We will be doing a separate webinar to disseminate the detailed findings of this RCT soon, but I'll share a couple of headlines very briefly now. Next slide, please. The study found that bicycles reduce commute time, increase punctuality to school, and reduce the number of days girls were absent from school by 28%. The program also improved measures of empowerment, including girls' sense of control over decisions affecting their lives. Their locus of control increased. And importantly, regarding mobility and safety, the study found that the intervention reduced the probability that a girl missed school or left home early from school due to concerns of safety by a third. Next slide, please. WBR has distributed over 200,000 bicycles to rural students over the last 15 years. And based on that, we have significant potential to scale rural mobility and bicycles in particular as a solution across developing regions, Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And so based on our experience, we have two specific policy recommendations. These are both kind of system level recommendations that have an important impact on education. The first recommendation is to amend the SDGs across the board, including education, to include rural mobility. And that will have a systems level impact, integrate rural mobility into government and funder education strategies and policies and programs and budgets, and really be able to catalyze that cross-sector partnership to expand students' access to education, particularly girls. And the second recommendation is for a UN-facilitated global compact to eliminate duties on bicycles, particularly for those targeting users at the base of the economic pyramid in developing countries. So for instance, in Zambia, the Buffalo bicycle that WBR produces and distributes comes into the country at $135, but ultimately the consumer, when an individual is paying for the bicycle, pays an extra $50, including duty and VAT. So these are two specific recommendations that we are proposing that will help scale the ability to get specially designed bicycles into the hands of girls to access education. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. And I think your focus on the idea of rural mobility is definitely an important factor to sort of consider. But I'm also wondering, like in the times of this COVID where mobility is restricted for everybody, what does it mean in these current times? And I was also reminded of an interview that I was doing with a young girl who's in the lockdown. And one of the things she misses the most during this time is to be able to take her cycle and just go to school and meet her friends, because I think from an empowerment point of view, it also sort of gives them a lot of confidence to be able to move around more freely. And the pandemic has sort of also curtailed that for a lot of girls now that their access to school has also been affected. So thank you for sharing that. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our last speaker for today, Abhinav. Welcome.
Yeah, hi.
Yep.
Extremely sorry for getting in late. There was some problem with my internet connectivity here. The cable got disconnected and I was not sure whether I'll be able to join in at all or not. So I did send a deck. Have you received it? Has the host received it? Suzanne?
Yes, give me 1 second.
Yeah. So while the deck is coming up, essentially, we exist with this, that a teacher changes the world one student at a time. And essentially, if you want to make an impact on education, unless and until the teacher gets enabled, the teacher will not be able to, influence a classroom. And if each classroom is not delivering positivity and is not able to focus on whole child development, and which includes all aspects of the child's development, social, emotional, physical, and in addition, of course, also focus on the academic part, education system will always not be able to deliver the life and learning outcomes which the children deserve. Are you able to see the screen? Because I'm not able to see the screen. Are you able to see the deck?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe I'll have to go blind on it. But essentially, so the first the first slide basically shows that on the right-hand side, you have, the focus of the teacher should be on social, emotional, cognitive, character, physical, as well as academic. And one more point that we want to highlight is that the teacher should, at an age appropriate and level appropriate manner, be able to explain to every single child what their role, what their family's role, and what their community's role in solving each of the sustainable development goals. If that does not happen, then the sustainable development goals can't be attained, and most definitely they can't remain sustained. If you look at India alone, around 300 million children will exit schools by 2030. If they don't have knowledge of SDGs, they will not really be helping sort of solve those sustainable development goals, and subsequently they will not help in making it sustainable. Next slide, please. So essentially what this slide says is that there are two gaps in education. One is that the pedagogy which is being taught in the best schools and probably not the best schools in a country, there's a 100-year gap in the way the teacher is approaching that pedagogy. And unless there is a leapfrog which happens at this juncture, it'll take 100 years to actually fill this gap. That's one. And the second is that the skills for the future are very different and nobody really knows. And unless the teacher is invested in their own lifelong learning, it's not going to change. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this slide basically says, one is of course the centricity of education in ensuring the achievement of all sustainable development goals. And the second is that the only option that we have to en masse and at scale to be able to impact the quality of teaching at this point in time is to use technology and smartphones, and Ovid has actually brought that to the fore as well. Next slide, please. So this slide basically says what we have been able to do. So working for the past 2-3 years, we have developed a collaborative mobile app platform using which state governments across India have trained around 300,000 teachers. This is slightly dated, and impacted the life and learning outcomes of close to 15 million children annually. And we have essentially not just a training platform, but we have a lifelong learning platform where a teacher gets exposed to trainings maybe once in a quarter or twice in a quarter, gets exposure or gets use of referenceable lesson plans every week or whenever they demand it. And every day they get a lot of short-term, bite-sized inputs around best practices of other teachers, what to do, what not to do, and so on and so forth. And also, they're provided opinion polls, they're provided a voice so that they can learn on a daily basis. So there's something which impacts on a quarterly basis. There's something which they use on demand depending upon whenever they need to take a particular course. So there are lesson plans, referenceable lesson plans available. And then finally, there are these daily doses of information which the teacher is consuming and using in the class as and when required. So
45 seconds.
Yeah. So the recommendation that we have, and there are two people in this particular panel itself whose teams or whose work is being sort of showcased on our platform. So for example, the happiness curriculum, which Vishal has contributed to, is now been disseminated to a large set of close to 100,000 teachers on our platform. And Megan's organization is also thinking of using our platform to train their own teachers. So there is a small pilot which is happening. I don't know whether Megan is even aware of that, but that's what we are doing. So what we are saying, and to the point made by the previous speakers, there is the need to enable communities to come together and maybe community youth to learn and to teach the children in that community. Our platform basically enables anybody who has motivation, has some communication skills, has some background. I'm not saying they have to be BEds or qualified teachers. They can pick up enough information so that they can teach one topic at a time. That is what our platform enables. And literally the community youth can teach their children. So one recommendation that we have is that we should employ community youth in this period when schools are not open, where children cannot move very far, community youth or siblings to do it. And the second is if the government can consider to pay these community youth while they're doing this. And that's it. That's the two recommendations that I wanted to make. Thanks.
And thank you, Abhinav. And I think you've sort of nicely captured the conversations in the previous presentations as well about the blend of communities with learning spaces and how we can enable that. I had actually missed out on one presenter, so I'm going to invite him now. Roland, over to you for your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Neha. I have a few slides, but good afternoon from Amsterdam. It's a real pleasure to join you today. We heard, and maybe it's good to be the last speaker, we heard some great concepts, some excellent education solutions during the session. And I'd like to take just a few minutes to highlight 2 points from my end. First of all, next slide, please. When we talk about building back better, we need to build resilient communities. And that's basically social and financial skills, empowering children with these essential skills. And secondly, a point looking at all the different presentations, looking at models to work together to reach scale with these innovations. I'm sure that you've all seen the pictures from around the world, even in places like Switzerland, of long queues for handouts because people were not resilient, not able to deal with financial shocks of the crisis. I think the COVID-19 is a real wake-up call, showing and highlighting the importance of financial skills. COVID-19 might be extreme, but it shows that there is a need to inhabit these essential skills of life skills, financial skills, among the next generation to deal with the unexpected. Many people still feel that financial education is something for in the households behind the door, but what if the parents don't understand money themselves? So many parents are living in poverty and their children as a result of that. Next week, the OECD will launch its next new financial literacy report around the world. And I can tell you already, the statistics don't look good. Next slide, please. So there is an urgent need for financial and entrepreneurship education. From Aflatoon's perspective, we really think this is an essential 21st century skill and an absolute must to build back stronger societies following COVID-19. Social financial education helps young people to think critically, learn about their rights and responsibilities. What can I expect from society? What can the community expect from me? And children need to learn financial skills, gain the knowledge to use money in a responsible manner. And that will help them to enable to be resilient and achieve their dreams. So the first point I would like to highlight is social financial education. I won't go into details. Life skills education, understanding money and using money to deal with shocks is an essential piece post-COVID-19. The second point, which relates more to the broader, next slide please, collaboration. And I'm using the Aflatoon methodology to show how we can work together in a very cost-effective manner. We've heard so many important initiatives today. How can we make them scalable? So we need to work together, everybody on this call, to make models of collaboration which reach many, many children. The Aflatoon model is a model where we work through a social franchise. And what you're seeing is that by not trying to do it by yourself alone, but building partnerships with so many different NGOs and other institutions, we can reach so many more children around the world. And I think Rana mentioned the word Lego piece. And in a way, we all have Lego pieces and Lego blocks, but we need to really put those different pieces together to make it a wall of Lego to be effective and scalable. If we want to really deal with the education crisis out there, our innovations are important, but working together is probably even more important at the moment. So we really need to look how we can bring these different innovations presented today in a way that the synergies of scale are coming together. So basically, the 2 points I'm trying to flag is let's build resilient societies by providing these children with life skills and financial education. And many of us here are making contributions there. And secondly, let's do it together through scalable models. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roland. And I think thank you for ending it with the idea of collaboration. That's one of the reasons why I guess all of us are here trying to sort of put all those building blocks together to build effective solutions. All right. So we have come to the Q&A section, and it is going to be a tall order to consolidate all these different things which have come up, but I'm going to attempt that. and feel free to sort of jump in. So one of the things that the group is going to do is to consolidate all of these into policy recommendations. So if I were to start with that question, that as we are sort of looking to approach governments and education systems, talking about the future and the 21st century that we are setting ourselves up for, what would be the key recommendations from what are the essential skills that need to be taught to children? So we saw a lot of conversation in the chat box as well around balancing the need for social emotional learning along with the core sort of curricular areas, aspects like reading. So it'll be good to hear some thoughts on that what are the essentials that we need to focus on as we look to move towards the future. That's one. I think the second definitely, which has opened up, is the role of communities and local youth, local champions, and how do we sort of, when we're talking about building blended learning models, how do we bring communities and learning spaces together to build more local solutions? And in that, what is the role of the teacher? Is it relevant? Does it need to be reimagined? Do they need to be part of that learning network, which we are looking to build at the local level? And I think the fourth, which always comes up when we talk about technology solutions, is the digital divide and how do we sort of enable greater access. Especially, there were a lot of conversations around girls and inclusion from a gender perspective as well, who continue to sort of be on the margin. So what does it mean for the digital divide? I guess these are the four sort of aspects which opened up for me, but happy to hear what are some of the other insights.
So shall we jump in and answer or raise our hand or?
I think you can answer and then other people can queue up, Rana, if you're ready.
Okay, I'll tackle the first one. What is the thing that we need to do? What do the children need? What does the education system need? I think one thing is this motivation that a child wants to learn, is ready to seek opportunities to learn, however difficult, wherever it is. And this is not just because COVID-19 is preventing us from the traditional ways of education. We don't know how education is going to look like in the future. This has been a conversation before COVID-19. So to me, it's about changing the framework. We're always looking at the teacher and the school as the center. And I think we need to shift that and say the child is the center. How do we motivate the child to want to learn? And then because of the internet and all that, the child will find a way. You know, it's like when they like to play a game. They will find a way to buy the game, to play the game, for video games and things like that. So it's about motivating the child. How do we do that? And I think governments, if they shift how they think and using the child, which leads to the community, of course, then that would be one way going forward, creating a change maker who's not just learning because he or she wants to. They're learning because they are taking responsibility and ownership of their own lives to become change makers.
So, can I interject?
Sure, Abhinav, go ahead.
So, Rana, I hear you, and ideally that would be the best way possible. But what I have seen, and maybe you come from a very different place, different background, maybe that's the perception. But in my study of education over the past 6-7 years that I've been working in it, I've seen that maybe like there are different aspects or different qualities that people have. Children have also different abilities. There are certain children who are inclined towards academics. There are certain children who are inclined towards the physical things. There are children who are inclined towards arts and so on and so forth. Now, to think that every child will be able to get motivated to learn in a certain manner, where there are not enough opportunities and different kinds of skills being allowed to be opened up, because that's how education has been structured, right? For him to be able to identify, find the right tools, enough structure and so on and so forth, that's slightly a tall order, given the fact that at least in India, I can share with you, around 40 to 50% of the families are first-time learners. For them to be able to provide the kind of tools which will enable a child to themselves learn will be tough. So while, I am of course colored by the fact that I'm working with teachers, the case that I would like to make and present to this team, and that was a question which Neha also asked, was what is the role of the teacher? I think the role of the teacher is extremely significant as a guide, as a mentor, as a person who provides that framework. We cannot suddenly make at least the younger children. I've seen children who are in their 11th or 12th grade take up a little more ownership of their own learning. But at the primary, at the middle school, at the secondary school level, a child taking up ownership on their own is a slightly tall order, given wherever we are, given the evolution of society, and given the fact that 40% of these are from extremely poor and maybe they are first generation learners. So my own suggestion and submission would be that any solution which will ensure inclusivity, which will ensure equity, and which will ensure quality for a larger mass of population will have to include teachers at the center. And teachers will be needed to be enabled for lifelong learning, and they have to first of all get motivated for their own capacity building, for accepting that it's not just a unidimensional academic focus that they should have. There are multiple aspects which they have to build, and they should be open to learning new thoughts, new pedagogies, new ways of approaching it, so that that gap which is there of 100 years gets fulfilled. And that also solves to a certain extent the digital gap. It is easier to provide digital access to teachers, and they can assist children. And of course, as more people will have digital access, as more people will have understanding of digital and so on and so forth, I think then would be a time where you can bring that tools to the parents, the community, and the siblings. But for the moment, I think a child-centered, education system is slightly utopian. I'm sorry if I'm, sort of trying to, talk over you. If that's not the intent. It's just I'm sharing my experiences and what I believe is the case, and I would love to hear your views on that and anybody else's view on that.
Thank
what I
you,
thought. Yeah.
Abhinav. I guess like everybody would be in agreement that we need to move towards a child-centered system, and there are processes and systems that need to be established to work towards that, because clearly that is what the future is going to be if we want to see children as change makers. But I think your point is interesting, that it's a spectrum from the early childhood to secondary to higher education, and that could mean different models sort of coming together, and roles of adults also around the child therefore changing.
Neha, can I come in, because I think it's an important point Abhinav is raising, but I think I'm in complete agreement with Abhinav. There is no disagreement there. We completely agree that we need to invest in the teachers and the quality teachers to interact with the child. 100%, I'm fully with Abhinav, and I think we all agree on this webinar. However, if you want to have quality teaching, it's the way how the teacher interacts with the child. And that's not something, a luxury for 20 years from now. We know how the rogue learning is not making much impact at the moment in the classroom. So when we talk about building the capacity, and specifically like the work my friend Abhinav is doing, we also need to look on how we provide specific skills to the teachers to interact in the most efficient way of teaching to the kids. But I think we're in agreement.
Sure. So I think just on that note, if we were to then come up with specific recommendations, and we'll come to the community part also, but if there are specific recommendations which we want to give from a policy point of view, that what does teacher professional development need to focus on then, if they are going to be sort of critical players in creating this child-centered system? So it'll be good to hear some thoughts on that, which can go into the document as well then. And I think some of them came up where the need for teachers to be comfortable with tech-based learning was one of it. Teachers sort of building their own understanding of maybe socio-emotional learning, and having the ability to, build resilience in children means that they need to be resilient themselves, and they need to go through that learning experience. So what could be some of the recommendations when we are talking about teachers?
Can I just say one thing on that? Actually, that we have to imagine ourselves like that we avoid having a conversation today that we could have had 10 years ago. We have to look at what's changed, and there's an enormous out of school dimension that's emerging during COVID and post. That's going to go on and on. I think we have to address that, And in tech, there's some comments there saying, well, tech doesn't do everything. You know, paper and pencil doesn't do everything. A teacher doesn't do everything. You know, bricks and mortar don't do everything. I think that's kind of criticism 101. I think the great examples of how you adopt tech to get your ends. There's some great examples around the table here. And there's also, you know, that connectivity doesn't reach everybody right now. But I talked to ministers of education that really only look at 15% of their population. Everybody else is unreachable. So if you have a penetration of connectivity that gets to 70%, then you can concentrate on the 30 with a portfolio of different means of bringing basic education to them, whatever that is. And I won't get into that because there's some great brains on here about what that should be, child-centered or not. But I think the whole thing is here, there's an out-of-school dimension, and then there's a tech delivery dimension. How can each of us look at our own solutions and look at them through a scale focus? And that was one of the things I was trying to bring out at the start. Educators, we never talk about scale, but there's incredible solutions around here. But if you don't say, how do I get to, you know, the other 90% of the population, it remains a conversation that would have been had here 10 years ago. Great minds, great focus, but what about scale? And maybe that's not just tech either. There's other vehicles, if you like, for that. And I just say that as generalities, but if we come to policy recommendations, at a policy recommendation level, they'll be looking for us to address that out-of-school dimension and that scaling dimension.
Sure, and I think Bridge has something to say to that, and then Eleanor.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think that on this panel, you almost cannot disagree with anything. These solutions that have come out are just fantastic from everybody, really. One point I want to make is that who's listening in, okay? It's these solution creators and providers who have a very powerful voice. Perhaps they don't have enough power to take it forward. Okay, so there's a problem here. I think we're talking sometimes within walls a little bit. And that applies to multilateral agencies. They are not really seeking out these solutions. But on the scale front, I want to go to Colin's comments. Yes, there's a new reality right now, and it's an out-of-school reality as well. So there are two different, perhaps, sets of solutions that we're talking about. Let me just focus a little bit on the out-of-school reality. The people, the way they've gone about the solutions right now about bridging the digital divide is, okay, how do we take the school curriculum onto the online platform and deliver it on some device? Okay, television, radio, mobile phones, etc. Right? That's one model. Take existing curricula and take it there. There are huge challenges in that, and we all know many failures in this space. The one part of the way to think about it is that, okay, what technology already people are using, okay, and what can you do on that, okay? Not necessarily even what content can you provide them, okay? What can you do on that, which is a slightly different question, which is where if we focus on certain critical skills in learning that we want to scale up, okay, we can't do everything. Okay, so perhaps numeracy, perhaps reading literacy, and perhaps a few more as well. How can you scale it? Now, one way to do it is to integrate something into something that people are already watching, are doing for hours on end every day, and they will do it for life. Now, I gave you the example a little bit about films and movies. There's Netflix, etc. I mean, you can do a lot with just something as simple as subtitles, okay? Now, if I take the numeracy angle, what do a lot of children learn their math and numeracy skills actually from sports? Baseball, cricket. You can go on soccer, perhaps. There is a lot of numeracy that is already naturally happening. Can you leverage that for something, right? So because you're guaranteed that people will engage with that for life. So it's almost integrating a learning goal into something that people are already doing versus creating content and taking it to them, which is harder.
Sure. Thank you, Bridge. I think those are important points to sort of start with what is already there. And I think your point around television, therefore, is very important because that's something that's more widely accessible than even smartphones today. Eleanor, you had a point to make.
Yeah, just briefly, when you were saying what can we actually do as far as policy goes, is obviously my focus, our focus is teachers. And in a magic crystal ball world, we would do really big changes to actual teacher training institutions and the way that teachers are trained fundamentally, which I think still is a massive issue in the countries that we are supporting. However, I think that is a long way off. So for me, it would be to obviously teacher professional development is our thing, but appropriate and relevant teacher professional development. I would like countries, ministries of education to really think, what great practice can we take globally that is applicable to our teachers teaching in our settings? Because I have seen too many examples where teachers are being asked to try something. I spent a lot of time in Zambia over the last 3 years, extensively in schools, where they've been asked to try lesson study, which is something that works very effectively in Japan. So therefore, Zambia has embraced it wholeheartedly. Now, it just doesn't, I don't think it will work very well for me in the UK, this particular method. It's worked really well there. I don't know if it suits everybody. And that for me is a really integral part of what you need to do when you're thinking about supporting teachers, is to make one size does not fit all. So for me, that's something that I think ministries really need to be very honest with themselves about the challenges that their teachers face and the challenges that they see in the teachers themselves, and think, how can we now adapt them, move their practice on, make sure they realize that they are still learning too. When I was at university learning to be a teacher, which incidentally took me 4 years, which was a fairly long time, I remember a lecturer saying to me, when you think you know how to teach, stop, because then you're basically you're not learning anymore, and you think you've got it nailed, and you will not have it nailed. And that is a message that I think is really, really powerful, and one that I don't see enough of, certainly in many of the ministries of education that we've spoken to. So making CPD absolutely standard and applicable to the teachers in those contexts would be my big policy thing.
Sure. And I think just sort of listening to you, maybe like a forum like this where teachers are coming together and talking about like what are the challenges and what are their needs and what they would like to focus on, is also something that the ministries could sort of be working
absolutely
towards. And I think I know we're sort of, running towards the last 10 minutes of the session, but it'll be good to hear some thoughts on what are the out of school models that we want to sort of work towards and recommend to the ministry, that what policy recommendations can we come up with that ministries need to focus on to bring communities into the process of learning, and what do we need to do to enable some of that? How am I supposed to interpret that silence?
The audience can come in now, right? So yeah, anybody can.
Yeah.
Can you maybe repeat the question? Sorry.
So my question is that we spoke about the in-school sort of role of the teacher as the world is changing, and how when we're talking about, the need for professional development, the need to focus on relevant and continuous professional development for teachers and lifelong learning. But there was also the other dimension of community-based models and learning moving out of school, and how a lot of sort of experimentation has also, not experimentation, it's already been happening, it's happening more now because of the situation we are in. So what are some of the recommendations around that area that we might want to focus on? And Rana.
Yeah, so I think we need to nuance this question, right? So we have, when we say out of school, what does that mean? Because in the conversation I'm seeing so you have the 0 to 5, which is early child development. Those are not in school, and they have a certain way of approach. And then you have above 5 who are not in school for other reasons, not because they're too young to go to school, right? So those are two different approaches. So again, we have to be nuanced. There's not one solution that fits all kids of all ages. So the recommendation was, if we're talking about early childhood, it's about focusing what's happening inside the home and how to make that happen, right? And it has to be simple. It has to be about fun. It has to be easy. And again, I don't think it should be parent focused because parents are there. They love their kids. They just don't know how to do it, and they're busy, and so on and so forth. So it's about how do we compensate for the parent, right? If we have one person in the neighborhood to be a catalyst, reading to the kids just to spark that love of learning, that pleasure, that fun that's connected to a text, and that could spill over to all aspects, math and others. And then that teaches the parent to do that. It's simple, it's easy, it's not scary because it's not in a school, it's not formal. It's just, you know, gathering kids, having fun, reading something from a text. So that's one stage. Then you have the other part, which is those kids that should be in school but are out of school for whatever reason, war, COVID, or child labor. How do you motivate those, right? Again, you need to connect it to fun. This is how we evolved in our brains. How do we connect it to fun? In a way that mimics that kind of motivation to seek out opportunities. But what I'm saying here is that we need to, the community part should be divided into parts and pieces to think holistically about it, and how each approach complements the other approaches for the different ages of the children. And lastly, I'm just going to say last point, solutions that need to scale have to be very flexible and agile and to be adaptable within a community. We don't want to be the program that comes from one country and it's adopted in another country. You know, that doesn't work. We all know. So it's like, what are those elements in programs that are so simple? It's like stripping it to the bare essence that allows that agency and that flexibility when adopted or scaled out or replicated across the world. And the three things we have seen is it has to be very simple, extremely simple. It has to be based on universal values, right? That we all share. That's not our specific to a particular culture. And thirdly, it has to give that ownership, that feeling of agency. I control it. And when I say We Love Reading is an example, I'm not saying it's the best example. I'm not saying it's the solution, but for early childhood, it works. And we've seen it because it has spread to 55 countries. It's simple, one person reading to the child in their language, wherever they want, whenever they want, whatever they want. So it's based on universal values of I love kids, I want to take care of my community. It's simple. You don't have to be trained. You could be illiterate. You're making it up as you go. And it's ownership. You decide what to do with it. But it opens that door, especially in the stage before you enter school and right at the cusp of getting into school but not being comfortable or no school, to open the door for teachers, for community, for bigger, or for social entrepreneurial skills or economics or finance, anything else. But that's one way, one piece of the part, one Lego, one component that others can build on.
Sure. Thank you. And I think just taking from that, the idea of collaboration and what kind of collaborations need to take place could also be a recommendation to put in there, and how those could be facilitated, and maybe a framework for building these collaborations could also be something that could go into the document. But I think based on what you were also saying, just the idea of having a champion in the community who could then focus on different aspects and dimensions, and then how do you sort of go about identifying those champions and working with them, building their capacity, keeping them motivated, are also some of the aspects to think about. And I know, Abhinav, you have your hand up, but I want to also give others an opportunity, those who haven't had a chance to share. So I also want to open up this whole aspect of social emotional learning. I think that's really, really important at this point in time, the ability of not just kids, I feel also adults, like all these young people in the community whom we're also talking about as champions or teachers, like even their ability to deal with trauma and everything that is going around. So are there any thoughts on that specifically, that what kind of recommendations do we need to articulate and formulate from that lens?
I'd jump in and just say that I think it's really important that we train teachers to be able to teach social and emotional learning. They don't know how to do it. They don't have the content, and they haven't been doing it, at least largely. So we need to get them up to speed so that they're actually able to do it. And I mean, I'm fully support all the conversation about teachers being lifelong learners. So we need to train them so that they can teach social and emotional learning, media literacy, because it's super important nowadays with misinformation. They need to be able to teach them how to do critical thinking. These are all 21st century skills that build upon the basics like reading and math and other things.
Thank you, David. There's something in the chat box. Yep, I guess we're moving towards the end of our conversation. Just to summarize, I would say that there are a lot of ideas. Colin, I don't know how you're going to put it all together in a 2-pager, but definitely I think one of the things that it has to be a spectrum of solutions that are being offered. Recommendations need to speak to different dimensions of even maybe redefining the objectives of education and the aims of education itself. To the kind of enabling ecosystem that we need to make. I think one thing which sort of stood out for me was the idea of learning communities and how those need to be created at different levels. I think even within the government circles, the idea of a learning community needs to sort of come alive, and that's where collaborations can play a key role. Learning communities of teachers, learning communities of children themselves to also facilitate a lot of peer learning, sharing of devices and tools of learning are also some of the ideas that sort of come up. So yes, so with that, I'd like to thank all of you for your participation, and for those who are interested in becoming a member, you can sort of show your interest and we'll send you emails later to join the Catalyst 2030 community. Yep. Thank you for all your inputs and insights. And we'll come back to you with the 2-pager document that will be consolidated and shared with the community later on. So
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.